Container home is the only option that allows you that luxury, that you can have your container here in Nairobi over a period of time, then you move it. There is no other building method, at least for now, that gives you that kind of mobility.
Do you need this guy? I'm a sawa.
You wanna be the metal boxes because of your butterfly. Your container is for your butterfly.
Now let's hear from our container house expert. Welcome to episode 2 of Beam Jengo podcast with me, your host, Miss Kahiro. Now, today we are joined by a very unconventional lady. Anafanya nini? She builds container houses. Now, who would have known that unaweza ishi kwa a metal box and live comfortably? She's also a DIY master. Watu wangu wa DIY? Today you're sorted. And I'm also joined by my co-host Hari, who I'm going to let introduce himself, and then our guest will introduce herself in a minute. Tenenalo?
Hi, my name is Hari, your favorite village builder, a civil structural engineer, a co-host of the show. Karibuni sana.
Karibu, our guest.
My name is Grace Atieno Odhiambo. I'm an interior designer, a contractor. I'm also a DIYer, amongst other things.
DIY master. we have seen your work. So, as I said, unconventional. Wewe tu unataka kufanya vitu not very normally. Sindio? In one of your videos kwa TikTok pale, wewe ni superstar wa TikTok pale, you said rent money is dead money. Yeah. Please explain to me about that.
Okay. So, I started off like everyone else. I think when you're from campus, you want to fly solo, you try get a house and you pay rent. And I also started construction in containers very early, immediately after campus. Okay. So over time, I realized people end up paying a lot in terms of rent over a longer period of time, but after every month, whatever you've paid as rent, you cannot really account for, or you cannot really say that was an expenditure on your part. It's just a recurrent expense. And so at the end of, say, 5 years or 10 years or 15 years that you've paid rent, that's just money you have been paying. It's like you're paying for space to just sleep and eat and probably bathe and store your items, you know. So for me, I figured if I could get a solution to build a house as opposed to paying rent, then whatever money I'll be putting in that construction is money that I'll be seeing. And probably I can use it as security if I want to get loan, or I can rent it out to someone else if, say, I'm not using the space anymore. So meaning another source of income. Or I can move it now in my option. I can move it from town to the shags, should there be a need. So for me, constructing was much better of an option and a much better way of spending my money as opposed to paying rent. So for me, rent money is dead money.
All right. So you're saying with a container house, for example, or building a house, and like when I rent, I can earn back some amount of money. Say if I make it an Airbnb or something, unlike a rented house. Is that what you mean by it's dead money?
I mean it this way. Say you're paying rent, 15,000 every month, right? That 15,000 is only valid for 30 days. After every 30 days, you need another 15,000. In 1 year, how much would you be paying? 900,000, I think. Yeah, 15 times 10, that's 150, right? Tukiongeza 30, that is 180. So that's 180 a year, right? Over a period of 5 years, you'd be looking at how much? You'd be looking at around 900,000, right? Yeah. So that is 900,000 that, say if you had a mortgage, you'd be paying towards owning your house. If you are building a container, or if you're in your container home, it is money you would have spent in your house, right? So say after every 5 years, you who is renting, You spent 900,000, but there is nothing you can show for it, right? Someone who's paying a mortgage has spent that same 900,000, and maybe a few more years, that house will be theirs. Someone who's living in a container home has spent that same 900,000 and they have a container house, right? A container in my case makes sense because I can have that container house now. Maybe say it's a bedsitter. I no longer need a bedsitter. I usually say if I was a man, because from where I come from, the Luo community, men are expected to build something back at home. Right?
Simba. They call it Simba.
We call it Simba.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Kumanisha, after a while, say in 5 years I was living in Nairobi, that bedsitter is no longer big enough for me. I need to do something in the shags. Instead of building another house, that same container house will go to shags, right? I would still have sorted the same need as someone else who's renting, right? Because at the end of the day, you'll still need to build something back at home. But you see, for me, that rent money that you have spent, I have spent it on something else that I can translate back to my hometown, right? So for me, rent money in that case is dead money. And you see, I've given that option that I can move my house. Container home is the only option that allows you that luxury, that you can have your container here in Nairobi over a period of time, then you move it. There is no other building method, at least for now, that gives you that kind of mobility.
Yeah. Let me bring you back a bit. This guy who is out of campus and is renting a container house he's renting a house for 15,000 shillings. This is someone who maybe is earning 30,000 shillings, okay? So this is someone who does not have the extra income to get an alternative at that point. To this person, is rent money still dead money? Because then for them, if they are not to live in that 15,000 house and, have that money being used to pay up for another house, then basically they'll be homeless for that period. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. So is for them rent money still dead money?
If our systems allowed us to get a mortgage without a big bank statement, then yes, rent money would be dead money if it allowed us, right? Because you'd go to the bank, get a mortgage agreement, be paying for that mortgage instead of paying for rent, right? But because the Kenyan systems, they expect you to have a certain threshold in terms of your bank statements, then there is no alternative at that particular time, right? If container contractors were comfortable to give that same kind of arrangement in terms of mortgage, then rent money would be dead money. Because you would go to them and have an agreement to build you, say, that same studio or bedsitter. Then the money you would be paying for rent, you'd be paying them for mortgage, right? But as of now, I don't think there is that kind of arrangement in place, because even the same contractors still expect you to have the same threshold as the bank, right? And also, yes, there has been a discussion around people entertaining the thought of lipa pole pole on container homes. But it's unfortunate that the Kenyan market, people are not very disciplined when it comes to credit facilities, right? So yes, you'll build someone a house. They'll pay you, but itafika mahali, they'll stop paying you. And when you look at it from a business point of view, you'd rather deal with the people who can afford and pay you in cash, you build, you move on, instead of those people you'll be following up on to be paying their mortgage. But now this is an idea I'm throwing out there. If someone has a piece of land that maybe is sitting idle, and they also have a certain amount of money they can spend on building these structures, they can have these structures placed on their piece of land to allow that college student to be paying rent there until they've finished paying the rent or paying the mortgage, then carry their container to whatever location they're comfortable.
Oh, wow. And that's, I had a question about land. Since these containers atuta ishi kwa hewa, you know, where do we get this land? So is that leasing?
Yes, containers allows you to entertain a number of options. The first one would be buying outrightly, buy a piece of land. The second would be lease a piece of land. And when it comes to lease, I encourage maybe you use the same space for something else. Probably if you're into business. The same space you'd be doing your business, if you can squeeze a certain portion of that space, you can place your house. Because a container house does not take up too much space, right? The third would be, you probably talk to a relative or a friend who has bought a piece of land for speculation. I usually say, we at least know one person who has a piece of land somewhere. They still don't know what to do with it. They're not really, so it's space that is sitting idle, right? Ni kama unamchungia hiyo land, sawa. Na kwa nini container can have you entertain that option is because when they're ready to build whatever they want to build, they will ask you to vacate their premise. And you will move your container home, right? But wanaogopa kukupatia hiyo option because they feel once you build your structure, you'll start saying, I built this house here. Compensate me for this. So instead of having that legal fight, they prefer let that land sit idle, right? But with a container home, it's strict. You just have this space. You have minimal interference with the space. A container home is supported by pillars. So if it's a 20-foot, it's supported by 4 pillars. That's all you need to do qua ground. Just recently, I came across an option of a portable biodigester. Yeah. So you see, it's adding to the whole concept of portability of a house. You will move with your solar, you'll move with your house, you'll move with your septic or your biodigester. So at the end of the day, if someone is giving you that space to use in the meantime, you can comfortably leave that land the way you found it, right? A few years back, my parents rented an own compound space. So there was a house and there was compound, right? If you can get that kind of an option, it doesn't necessarily need to be a rented space. It could be your parents' space. They allow you just like a small space for you to start off with. If you're blessed that way, right? You build your house there until now you can secure your own space. Then eventually you'll move your house, right? But say if you're to build a brick and mortar, they'll tell you that space is planned for something else, you know? You cannot do something there. For us girls, you might have fights with your brothers if you're to build something in your father's compound. In as much as now, girls, boys, you inherit, you know? Yeah. You can be rented without paying space on your father's land for a certain period of time until you set yourself up. Then you move without fighting with your brothers, you know? So for me, container allows you that option to entertain the different options you can consider if you're looking at container homes, if you open your mind to such options.
Okay. So back to that comrade. So are you saying that the comrade is doomed? Because hakuna hiyo option ya mortgage ya for containers. So now they're doomed to pay this 15K until they get that kapesa mingi to actually buy a container for themselves.
Tuangalie mindset ya comrade. Comrade akilipwa 30,000, atatafuta maybe bedsitter, 1 bedroom, maybe alipe 10,000, abakishe pesa ya food, ya fare and all. Akiongezewa pesa ikuje 50,000, atahama aende kwa 15,000. Akiongezwa iwe 60, atahama kwa 20. Unanielewa? So, there is that comrade who will be arguing from a point of an earn 60,000 and analipa rent 30,000. Unanielewa? Huyo hawezi niambia haizi afford container home. Comfortably anaweza afford container home. Comfortably. So, because tumekosa hiyo option ya kuendea mortgage, bado kuna option ya kusave. Sawa? I usually say, even if you're buying, say, a piece of land and na unalipa mdogo mdogo, what do they ask you first? Deposit.
Right.
Even if you choose to entertain or even approach someone who does a container home and ask them that, could you give me this solution? They'll ask you for what? Deposit. Even if you go to that bank, what will they ask you for? Deposit. So meaning you need to have a little bit of savings. Walipie sawa. Kuna bado option ya soft loan. Sindio? I'm sure it's not an option for everyone, but you can find someone who can give you a soft loan. I've handled clients who've had their relatives. There was one client who had his brother loan him 1-point-something million to finish off a house so that he can stop renting and move into this house. And the money he would have been renting, amlipe.
Right.
Unanielewa? So there is still that option. But still, you need, haizi kukupatia, say a house is 1.5 million. Kidogo, it's a little bit unreasonable for you to go ask for that 1.5 million. If you have 500,000, yes. If you have 500,000, no one will ask for 1 million shillings in a skika, right? So you can still do that. At the end of the day, you still need to have savings. Someone asked me, where did I get money to build a container home? I work, right? I save, yes. And because I had the vision of building a container home, for me, I started it in blocks. I bought the containers, had them kidogo, nikachanga paka ya kufinish, nikafinish, but I only finished it to the standard I could say I could comfortably move in. So I moved into my house when it was not 100% done.
Okay.
It was around 80% done. Yeah.
If I may ask, are we trying to say that currently in the Kenyan market, there are no banks that finance container homes?
Unless I'm wrong,
No.
but there's none.
So also they're not insured?
No. Okay, yes, they're not insured. But you see, the whole reason why we are in this position is first, those bankers also do not understand the whole concept of container housing. Yeah. Eventually, I'm sure we'll be talking about permits. Yes. Those same authorities, Wanyakoko, yes, they've not understood the whole concept around container housing, right? Yeah. So that's why I try as much as possible to put information out there through my different platforms, hoping that people will learn, and also from the fact that I not only build them, I also use them. So from my point, I'm giving you facts. I'm not giving you theory. I'm not trying to sell you an idea. I'm sharing with you my experience. From my experience, you can learn something. At the end of seeing my content and seeing my progress, if still it does not speak to you, well and good. But if it does, at least if you choose to go into that space, you're going with all the information you need.
Okay. So now why would I, as someone who's trying to get out from renting, why would I choose a container house with all these risks? It's not insured. If anything happens, cost on me kabisa. How are you dealing with those risks as a person who lives in one or builds them?
Let's be very honest. Even the brick and mortar structures, not all are insured.
True.
Right? And for something to be insured, it has to pass through quite a number of stages to make sure liability is not too much, right? And most of these constructions out here do not go through that liability, test, right? In terms of insurance, I'll pose it this way. It's not 100% not insured. If you are working with a contractor who knows for sure what they're doing, and they have a reputable fit out, and they have ended up constructing your house for you, right? They should, in your contract, the contract you signed while building this container home, in your contract, you should have 6 to 1 year worth of period in terms of insurance. Okay. That way, say something is not working, right? Or there is any fault in terms of materials and the building process, they can cover it, right? I have not entertained the thought of getting an insurer to come in and see if they can insure my house. But say you can consider that option. The same insurer will need you to give them an assurance that your house was built to standards. How will you prove that? If you have a contractor who can guarantee that, right? So just from a comfortable or a simple decision of choosing a proper contractor to build your house gives you the right steps to sorting that out, sorting the insurance bit. When it comes to getting mortgage or having the bank finance you, they do not finance just for one reason. That container homes, they have measured on this one aspect of container homes, that it's a portable structure, right? So they'll not finance that container in that sense. You'll need to have security. So say if you have a piece of land, it's the piece of land you will use to get the finances to build your container home. But you cannot say, here, even brick and mortar, what do you take to them? You take to them the title deed, right? And until you're paid, they are co-owners of your property, right? Because you cannot separate the house from the land, right? But containers, you can separate the container.
Unaweza amka asubuhi
From the land.
na uende.
Yes? Okay. But if your piece of land is worth something, then you can use that as security to get money to build your container home. So what they'll be keen on is not your container home, but will be your piece of land. But then again, when you're going for this loan, you have to give a reason, right? They too expect you to choose a reputable contractor so that their money is used in the right way. Isijengwe kwa kitu kesho itaporomoka, you know? So for them, they also, I think they're out there looking for people who can say for sure,
Yes.
I'm building a good container home. You can trust me in case of liability. You can use my fit out for this. Please give this client this kind of loan.
We have talked about what a Kenyan can do. Now, what do you think, in your opinion, banks can do to enable this Kenyan who really wants a container house get it? What do you think in the banks can do?
The banks can entertain discussions around container homes. They can pinpoint people who are well informed about the option and just have a discussion with them. And just basically do a study, and an honest study, to see the positives and the negatives of an option. Because everything has pros and cons, right? So instead of selling to the bank all the pros, I think they also need to understand the cons, right? With that information, they too are able to do quality assurance, to just make sure the building construction has been done as per, you know? And once I think they have that information, they shouldn't be too scared to give loans on that option. But I personally have approached a few banks to see if this is an option. They usually stop me at the point of tell your client to bring security, then we'll give them a loan.
And security in this case is?
Probably land, you know, or if you have a title deed for another piece of, or a house, you know. And there's always a way to go around it. If you have a parent or someone who has a piece of land and they're not using their property, you can use that against you. But you see, even them, because they do not have the right information, they'll not be too quick to give you their land to use as security. Yeah. So the starting point would be first, let's understand this as an option. To all parties, that be it the authorities who approve the structures, to the builders who build it, to the financiers, that would be the bank, and to the users. Once everyone has information, then working around it is easy.
Okay. And before we go to the approvals, you've mentioned making sure that you have qualified contractors working on your building. So let's talk about the people who are needed in building. Normally, basically, ni architects, contractors, engineers. Kwa a container house, do you need this guy? Do you need this guy? Do you need an engineer? Ama uko tu sawa.
Container home, globally, is creating its own space. And the people who design and build these container homes are known as architainers or cargo. The architecture of shipping containers is known as cargotecture, right? So
That's a new one. Architainers,
Yeah.
cargotecture.
Cargotecture. Yeah.
Ah.
So there's still, I think, discussion around the actual name to give people who have specialized in containers, right? And you'll find most people who you've mentioned, the architects, the interior designers, the civil engineers, in their field of training, all their training is centered around brick and mortar.
For sure.
Right?
And you complained about this in one of your videos.
When you come to containers, dynamics change. Yeah. I usually say, when I was in design school, I was taught rules not to break in a space. In containers, I break almost all of them. Yeah? From how wide the door should be, to how big a space should be, to what direction the door should face. In containers, I break almost all of them, right? So that tells you the rules containers play with might not be the same rules as brick and mortar. So when you're looking at containers, you look at it from a different point of view. Now, it helps if you have technical training in building, right? As I've mentioned, I'm an interior designer. So my interior design helps me so much in this space. Then there is another challenge that no school teaches you about cargotecture. So most of the things we know is basically trial and error. And thank God for people who went before us, people who are abroad, who started the whole building with container kind of thing. And they're very generous with information. They've shared information, but they'll not give you everything. So if you choose to do it here, the materials they will be mentioning in those videos are not the same materials you'll get in Kenya, right? So you'll have to find the close second, right? So there's a lot of learning and carving it to meet the Kenyan market that, being very honest, the first projects I personally handled, and I think anyone who's in this space handled, our clients, penye wako, Mungu awabariki.
Because they trusted you as you are.
Penye wako, Mungu awabariki.
Let me ask. I'm sure you've worked with quite a few professionals, architects, structural engineers, etc. Do you feel like these people understand cargotecture? That is, do you feel they understand, now on the broad perspective, alternative methods of construction? And bringing it back, do you feel our schools, our universities, our technical institutions are doing enough to ensure that this person they are churning out is fully equipped? If they meet someone as an architect, if they meet someone who wants a log house, for example, they can comfortably handle.
I want to say I had no. But naogopa nitarushiwa. Yeah?
Yeah.
But yeah, most of these professionals do not understand these spaces, right? Do not understand how to go about the spaces. Most times, they will try copy-paste brick and mortar concepts, huku kwengine. And as I've said, the rules are very different. Rules are different, right? So unless you get an architect who has the same interest, now they shift from architecture to cargotecture. He's an architect, yes, but now they're training themselves towards cargotecture, right? That particular professional will be very good for that space. They'll give quality, they'll give good designs, they'll give good products. But just an architect who all his life amegrown a brick and mortar, akikuja hapa, kidogo lazima inge training.
I know they will come for you. but I think ukweli lazima usemwe.
Kidogo lazima. But unataka kuanzisha
Paul,
vitu hivi.
achana nayo, pass.
But anyways, warushe, aren't architects rigid? Lord, wasinirushe man.
You know, generally, it's said that engineers are the ones who are rigid. So if I'm in a conversation that architects are called rigid,
There you go.
I support.
Yes. Tuende nalo.
But unajua sisi interior designers na architects kidogo. Lakini at the end of the day, kidogo yes. One, because of the fact that they believe architecture ilianza kitambo. Sawa. But you see, architecture in its own definition is just the design of spaces, right? It does not necessarily stick them to brick and mortar. So an architect who's open-minded will still practice architecture with whatever building
Even
material
an
they
aircraft.
have. Yes, with whatever building. Part of inaitwaje? I think career options zenye interior design ina opt. Hata ni hiyo aircraft design, I think there is a name for that. Unaona?
Wow.
But unaona sisi interior designer anajua nini? Anatoka nje ya design, duka, ofisi, nyumba, nini. There are different places you can practice your interior design, even in media. Because part of what we train on is also photography and videography, though in passing. But if you choose to master in that, you can still be a very good videographer or photographer of spaces. If you had the background information or the background training in interior design. I think the same applies to architecture. So an open-minded professional will have no problem dealing with these things. But one who's close-minded and thinks that brick and mortar is superior to any other building method will have a challenge in this.
So you're saying, would you like to write a petition to the Ministry of Education? Waweke hizi vitu watu wafunzwe.
Yes, please.
Sindio?
Yes, please.
There's that option?
Yes.
We are working on that. Thank you.
Let me ask. I am a typical Kenyan. I grew up in a very difficult childhood. We lived in this one-room house. I come to Nairobi, I pursue my profession. I earn this good money. I really want a container house. I went somewhere and I saw one and I loved it. But then I want a big house. I grew up in this tiny space and now I want a big house. One, is it achievable to build big, massive houses with containers? And number two, what's the maximum floors you can go with a container house?
Okay. So, I'm also using that question to also just educate others. Yeah. When you are even thinking about container as a building block in your construction, please embrace the characteristics and the aspects a container brings to you, right? I have seen instances where people have built with containers, but they've taken that block of a container, they've cut the whole face this side, the whole face this side, so it's just the pillars standing, right? So in that case, you wonder, why did they choose a container? Because they've cut everything. Why did they choose a container? But if you embrace the container for the building block that it is, you can achieve massive, beautiful spaces with them as blocks. What I usually say is containers are like Legos for adults. All you have to do is play around how to place them, right? You can still get that massive 8-bedroom or 10-bedroom or 20-bedroom you might want if you embrace containers and now the environment. I'll give an example. You can have a container maybe formed as a U. Then you have, say, your bedrooms, your toilets, and whatever, the spaces that you're comfortable with being small within the containers. Yeah. Then the spaces that you really want to have big, you can have in this space that the U has formed. So if you want a big kitchen and you want a big living room, you can have it upper ground space, right? But your bathrooms, your toilets, your bedrooms, you can have them within the containers. You would have used the container, achieved the spaces you want, without really downplaying the container as a block.
Right. Okay. Hold on hapo kwa toilets and what. Let's talk about waste. How do you manage waste in a container house?
You manage it the same way you would manage any other building method. The dynamics are not different. If anything, for containers, it's even more affordable because our walls are very slim, right? So you don't have a lot of pipes going through the walls, nini. Sisi kwetu tuna prefer penye kama choo iko hapa, isipite within the wall kupeleka waste huko, itoke nje. Right? Kama ni maji inaingia, iingie tu penye hiyo point yenye inatakikana iingie tu. So you'll find our plumbing system is very easy. You don't have massive piping going through your walls because our walls do not offer us that luxury to have pipes go through it. So for us, if you say plumbing is just the same as any other, just that I think for us is much easier than a brick and mortar.
Okay, let me take you back a bit. On the U kind of construction, so you have, let's say, 3 containers forming a U. Can you merge that with another building method, let's say brick and mortar or any other building method?
Yes, you can merge it. You can merge it with any other alternative you have out there. Okay. Yeah, but you just need the right contractor to understand how to merge. Because you say like brick and mortar, simiti na chuma saa zingine huwa zisikizani without kama ija creatiwa profile yenye inaweza marry nayo. So you might find you done your container and you want to do your brick and mortar hapo. If you've not found a binding or a connector, you can have your wall collapse on its own as your containers remain. So it's important to know how to integrate the other building methods with containers if you're doing your structures.
Okay. You've mentioned walls. Yeah. Your walls in a container house is made of metal. Let's talk about how to regulate the temperatures.
Containers, in terms of heat regulation, you have different options. Now, your choice is based on your cost, right? The most preferred would be spray foam insulation. But spray foam, I think I've met 1 or 2 vendors here, but I'm not sure if they're in business because of the cost.
Oh, it's too expensive?
It's too expensive, right? And the Kenyan market is very sensitive when it comes to cost. So yes, it might be the best option, but because of the cost, they'll not want it, right? But we have very easy close seconds. We have rock wool insulation. We have styrofoam insulation. And it's best also to understand how these materials work. Because say in a case of styrofoam insulation, they come in different thicknesses. And there was a time I did a video on styrofoam not being the best option. And I too learned that I was working, I made that video from a point of not having enough knowledge on the product. Styrofoam comes in different sizes. The one recommended for walls in a container home are expensive, but are the ones that you will not to use any other medium to connect it to the container. But if you choose to cut your costs in terms of thickness and go for a thinner option, then you'll have to look for a binding agent to have it bind to your container walls.
So at the end of the day, are you really saving money?
You could be saving money, but because of that binding agent you have introduced, it now poses a risk to you.
How so?
I usually say, when I have built your container home and I have taken it to your space, I will not tell you what not to do to your container. I might give you that disclaimer, but chances are you'll forget about it, right? Most of these binding agents you use to adhere this thin styrofoam to your container, they propel fire, if I can say they're fuel to fire, right? So when you come later, nimedeliver container yangu nimekuachia kwako. You come later, you think, hawakunifanyia keji ya gas. Nichome keji hapa nje. Sawa. Si mimi nimemaliza na mimi nimeenda. Tuli argue cost ukabagain kweli kweli, sio? Ukuje utafute welder vizuri akujenge, akuwekea umwambie si unatoboa tuna moto, afu pipe inapita. Hiyo moto una introduce time ya kuweld, ikimeet the fuel, then your insulation starts burning, right? And kwa hii insulation, what do we have there? You have your piping, your electrical, you have your piping, your plumbing, right? There is so much going on between the drywall you see and the container, right? So with this medium out of the way and introduction of fire, even if you passed your electrical wires kwa conduit, hiyo moto si imemeltisha nini yako? Yes. Now, without explaining further, electrical connection na container, what are you doing?
A metal one, a metal house.
That is, and on the inside, what is this material after the insulation? What is this material that we see?
So usually the layers are, though I learned recently that in extreme weather conditions, I went to one container construction that did quite a number of layers. But let's talk standard. Standard is the container, your insulation.
That is like the styrofoam, for example.
Yes, it could be the styrofoam or rock wool or whatever. Then your, say, plumbing or electrical wiring. Then gypsum. In some cases, blockboard. In some cases, plywood. Then, in some cases, what follows is tiles. Okay. So, say in wet areas or in kitchens. Yeah.
And now, in those wet areas, let's say we are going, first of all, what's the best option? Blockboard, plywood, gypsum, in your experience?
If you're doing, depends on the product you're doing. But if you're doing a house, I would recommend gypsum because it gives you that homely feel. There is a product we also use, but mainly use it in offices. It's called insulating panels. It's basically a metal sheet with styrofoam thickness of 50 mm within those two metal sheets. Then that is a one size fit all. It's 3 in 1. You just come and place it on your container.
And now, in those wet areas, getting back to my question, how do I waterproof? Because now I understand that tiling is not really a method to waterproof. It's just a finish. How do I ensure that whatever material I've placed the water does not have to, it does not seep in water? Okay.
Yeah. So what I also understand, we have quite a number of options, but I'll speak mainly on what we have done in the past. Gypsum comes in 3 options. You have the normal gypsum, then you have the moisture. Yes, and then you have the fire rated boards. Yes. So the moisture comes in green, the fire comes, I think, in pink, the normal one comes in gray. Yeah. When you're doing wet areas, I would recommend you do the green ones.
Okay. That's the moisture board.
The moisture boards, right. Once you've done the green ones, of course, at your joints, you'll do the filler works, right? That also adds to, would I say, waterproofing to some level, right? The best practice to do is do a good skim on that space. That helps in waterproofing, right? Taking care of the joints where leakages could go, right? But that process also has quite a hefty cost on it. Okay. So the Kenyan contractor or the Kenyan client would ask, can this still work without that option? And if it does, they will skip that option, right? Yeah. Then we go straight to tile works. Now, tile works can resist moisture to a certain level. Of course, if your space has flooded, there's nothing you can do about it, right? But if your space hasn't flooded, I think you can have a few years of your moisture not passing your tiles to the walls, especially on the walls. Now on the floor, when you're doing our floor traps, you usually do a screed at certain thickness of koroga. And within that koroga, we also use waterproofing solutions to help with that koroga being waterproof. I have had instances where I skipped that space, that step, and over time, kama ni bafu na ni bafu, maybe drain imeblock, maji kasit, unaanza kuona maji natoka chini. So yes, tiles are not waterproofed, but if you do your flooring, your subflooring to be waterproofed before you do your tiles, then you're good to go. And I think the same process applies also to brick and mortar.
And are you using normal tiles?
Yeah.
Okay.
We use normal tiles, but now when you're fixing it in a container, it's recommended to use adhesive.
Adhesive.
Are there specific environments that will be said to be suitable for a container? Ama inaweza stand anywhere. Mandera, Nyeri, anywhere.
Container inaweza survive anywhere. It's just that different environments call for different considerations in terms of fabrication, right? How I will insulate my container that is going to be placed in Nairobi might not be the same way I will insulate a container that is going to Mombasa, right? Because the weather conditions and the weather dictations are different, right? What I'm experiencing here might not be the same as what I'm experiencing in. If I'm designing or insulating a container in Nairobi, might not be the same way I will insulate a container that would go, say, in Nyeri. There was a project we did in Nyeri, baridi iko Nyeri.
Nimesomea uko, I know.
People who live there, I don't know how they survive. Yeah? So how I insulate that container might not be the same way I insulate this side. But then again, abroad, where they experience winter, they have an additional consideration on heating your spaces. Kenya has not gotten to that level where we need to consider it as an issue. But say if you're in a very extreme weather condition where it needs you to find a heating solution, then I think maybe that container that will be going to that region will have to cater for heating solutions. And that will dictate all the way to the choice of materials you use inside, right? Say, for example, flooring. If it's a cold space, now weke tiles. You've made that space colder, right? Yet you have options come SPC, laminated flooring that you could entertain. And if you can get the system to warm your flooring, then you can have that system sit very neatly under these other options apart from tiling.
Okay. Hi, we've talked about temperatures. Let's talk about the rust. It's a container house, it's metal. Is it inevitable that I will live with rust? Is there something that you do during the building of this container to avoid the rusting?
Container is made out of material known as cotton steel. Cotton steel, how it behaves, with age, it adds to its layer, right? So ile rust yenye unaona, but pia inalingana na degree ya rust. The first instance of rust you see, it's like adding to its layer. But when the rust is left unattended to over a long period of time, then those layers fall apart and then now you remain with a very slim layer. Mild steel, ukiona rust, just know you've lost a layer, right? It's not the same as cotton steel. Cotton steel adds to it. Mild steel eats to its layers, right?
So the rust is good?
To some level.
Okay.
It buys you time. If you are a procrastinator kama mimi, ukiona rust ndo ile ukianza kujipanga,
by the time you're acting on it,
inakubaia time. Si kama brick and mortar, si kama mild steel, ukiona rust, you have to deal with it immediately, right? Containers were designed to survive sea conditions, the salty water conditions, right? Mild steel cannot survive there, I think, for a month or even a few weeks, right? But containers, before you see me working on a container, that container is 15 plus years.
Oh, okay.
Na imekuwa wapi? salty water environment all its 15 years, right?
Yeah.
So when you remove your container from say the pots, the depots, and you bring it to normal environment, then it has rust. It's best first you sand down the rust. After sanding down the rust, now you prepare it the same way you'd prepare gari.
Okay.
Do body filler, do priming, do final paint. Initially, as I've said, cargotecture is a learning curve, right? When we started, we were keen on rust on the exteriors. Whatever you can see on the exterior or whatever that has access to rain. But over time, I have learned that even the mild steel we introduce within our walls, it's advisable if you could prime those ones too. Yeah, because containers go through a process known as condensation, right? So there is moisture that is present there, and there is a layer of drywall you've placed hapa. So your moisture iko hapo ndani, somehow it got trapped. So that also informs the kind of insulation you will use. If you can use an insulation that can absorb a bit of this moisture, hata ikikuwa introduced in that space, when it meets your mild steel, of course over a period of 50 plus years it rust, but itakuwa imekubaia time. But if you did not take extra consideration on your mild steel, yet you have forgotten the fact that the containers condense and you've chosen the wrong insulating material, and then it's just a matter of time before now your structure starts falling apart.
So me as a client, do I really need to know all this? Who am I getting? Is it a contractor? Who am I getting to deal with all these nitty-gritties?
I like to say containers construction has not yet gotten to that time that is DIY friendly, right? Because there's a lot of information you might not know. You might just see the face value and you think, naeza tafuta fundi wa gypsum, anifungie gypsum, naeza tafuta fundi wa tiles, you know? So through conversations like this, then you will realize there is a lot that maybe you might have missed if you are to DIY your container home, right? So it's best to choose a contractor who understands containers for what they are, right? But then again, we are in a season where we have, because there's no regulation in this field, the cargotecture field, right? So anyone who might know where to get a container and might know a few fundis can pose as a contractor, right? So it's your responsibility as the client to make sure that the contractor you've chosen to work with will not only build you a home, but will consider your home, will look beyond the money you're paying them at that particular time. I'll tell you everything you want to hear. Ndio to sign your contract, ni kujenge nyumba. When your house falls apart 10, 15, 20 years, mi sitakuwa. Sitoka tumemalizana kwa contract.
I notice you are calling it container home rather than container house. Now, this container home, now from a structural engineering perspective, structural engineers are people who want to sleep vizuri. And by that I mean a structural engineer will do everything and anything in their power to ensure that safety is guaranteed. The factor of safety is as high as possible. Now, earlier on you mentioned this concept of someone getting a container, then cutting almost all pieces. As a structural engineer, when I hear that, I cringe because I feel like you've damaged the support of the container. And then now also adding to the same question, you as a container house builder and a contractor, how do you work on other things such as foundations? How do you ensure that my foundation is up to standard to bear this house? How do you ensure that this container house I'm building on a hill will not be carried away by wind? How do you navigate around that on the structural engineering perspective?
Okay, so I think initially when I mentioned professionals in this space, I mentioned lazima wakuje class kidogo. Yes. Same applies to structural engineers, right? Yes. So a structural engineer first needs to understand how a container is designed, manufactured, and what was the initial use of a container, right?
Yeah.
A container was meant to carry as much weight. That I'll have to confirm exactly how much weight a container has, but an empty container in itself is around 3 tons in itself, right? It's designed to be carried from the top all through the 15 years without it collapsing with whatever weight it has inside. I think it can go 20 plus tonnage ndani, right? Because sisi tukijenga nyumba tunaiongezaga up to around 15 tons. Mwenye ameiongeza sana, right? So it is designed to go all the way, I think even up to 50 tons, though I'm using the word think. I'm not sure how the maximum weight a container can hold. But it's designed to carry 20 plus tons and move from one point to another without it collapsing. So whatever we do with containers, if we are to use it as a box, we are underutilizing it, right? But the moment we start creating openings, we are starting to weaken the structure, right? There is a safe way of introducing openings to a container. Then there is the unsafe way of introducing openings to a container. A container has a bottom rail, it has side pillars, then it has a top rail. The walls are corrugated. This adds to the structure of the container. The floor, kuna channels zimepita katikati, alafu board imekalia juu, right? So this structure, say I'm doing a container, vile nakwambia, then nimekata one side and one side, right? If the only information you have is that a container is designed to carry tonnage, and you use that information to go do a container structure, chances are that structure will collapse over time. But if you have the extra information that the walls are designed a certain kind of way to add to the structure, then you know when I'm cutting this face, I need to introduce something in place of whatever I have cut. So say I've cut a window, I need to do a framework to support that gap that I have removed, right? There was an instance we did a container home in Sabaki. Then containers come with different structures. I'm telling you, this thing is a learning curve you learn with experience. So containers, kuna zenye kule juu inakuja, they don't come the same way. So someone who does this would tell you this is a container you can cut that much, and this is a container that you don't dare cut that much. So at that particular time, we were not keen on that information. So when we were choosing a container with a client, I'm the one who actually guided that client in choosing containers. Si tulikuwa tunaangalia condition ya container, haina rust, haina leakage, haina patch, chukua. Then the design needed us to cut one whole side of a 40-foot container. The day we were moving that container to site. Mlikuwa boarding school?
Yes.
Mliona vile the metal boxes zilikuwa zinafanya butterfly.
Yes.
Hiyo container ilifanya
Pigwa
My Lord.
What?
So I did that because we were not keen on the structure of the container before we introduced that bit of cutting, right? And some cuttings, it's recommended to do it on site before transit, after transit, not before transit. So sisi tulikata before transit, tukabeba container, and I'm thankful we did that before transit, because maybe if we had cut on site, then we wouldn't be too keen on that element that it's weak on that side, and maybe we would have done a very weak structure for the client. So good thing it did that. We had to do bodyworks, kunyorosha, panel beating until it came back to shape. But I don't think it came to 100% in terms of shape, because when it bends, it also bends the lower rail. So you're affecting quite a number of things with just that small mistake.
Sasa makosa imefanyika. Sasa
So
who is to
tutadu?
so what tutafanya nini?
So there, a structural engineer, before they can come and give their recommendations, they first need to consult an architect. Sawa. So that's why sometimes mi husema, maybe an architect is not very needed in this space. A structural engineer is not needed in this space because they would not know what to look out for.
Right. Okay.
Hapo watakupika.
Najua.
As we are almost wrapping up, kuna kitu hatukuwa kuongelelea permits.
Yeah.
Talk to us about permits. Are they needed?
I like how you marry these questions because the same sentiments I've just voiced, they translate to permits, right? So when you're doing your permits, the county governments, whoever is approving the permits and approvals and all, because they don't want to spend time thinking about structures and is it safe, is it not, right? They first send you to two professionals, the architect and the structural engineer, for them to figure out if whatever you are designing is worth being built, right? And that is the only marking scheme they have, right? But you see, these professionals, when it comes to this space,
They do not.
right? So inaacha container housing in a float.
There's a gap.
Yes, because huko watakutuma uende utafute architect akufanyie design. Architect atakufanyia tu design, sinipami tunataka, chukua enda nayo. Structural engineer, hata hajui recommendations gani atafanya. Most times I have not even seen one who has done. Structural engineer only comes when now you're stacking a number of containers and now they have to look at a block in its own. And still there, I feel they're not well informed. So the only place maybe they might give the recommendation is on civil works, foundation only. Because ukipata kama kwa port, containers inaendaga 8 floors high. Na hazikwangi na any fastening kwa joints. Zikiwa kwa meli, space inaenda hivi, the only thing it has ni nini? A lock that joins this container to this container and that container, right? Now, take something that was designed for that space, bring it to dry land, then tell a structural engineer to give. They do not know what to do. And they'll give recommendations that are out of this world if you are to translate it to containers, right? So when it comes to permits, they'll send you this. Just the other day, I was in one county. I'll not mention because I don't want them to come for me. And we are supposed to deliver a container home to a site that I will also not mention because people will marry. And what Kanjo alikuja site. Akatuza wapi permit ya hizi tuka-explain, yeah, this is a container home. They said, do you have approvals? Namuza, what approvals? Right? Kuja kwa ofisi. So for them is, they know, the information they have is structure needs approvals for this. So I took the time and I went to the county government. Huko kwenyewe penye approvals zinapatikana. Nikapatana na planner. Now we started explaining. Kamuliza, what is expected of a container home? Akanipatia a whole list. And I think I have it here. Site plan, akasema if it's 1 level, architectural drawing only. If it's 2, structural and architectural drawing. Inspection, occupation, BP approvals, site boards, public health. Your list yote. So, I'll give one instance. Site board. Containers, how we operate. We build containers from our site in Syokimau. So, in instances, 100%. Hata kwa structure ya nje, we try as much as possible itoke kama ni 100%. So if it's windows, doors, we've already cutted.
So you are delivering, on that day someone can move in?
So niambie site board inafanya kazi gani hapo?
Watu wa county, mkuje mkae hapa mtuambie. I think this is a conversation we really must have, because shifting a bit on the cars industry.
Yeah.
I've had guys who have imported electric cars getting to the port and it's hell.
Yes.
Because this guy has been trained on a fuel car.
Yes.
They do not
Capacity.
fuel capacity. Yes. This guy does not know there's a car that can run on charge.
Yes.
So I think it's the same thing in this industry. We have authorities, and this I put out to National Construction Authority, county governments, the engineers board, everyone. It's now time, things are moving. We need to get to a point that we are embracing new technologies. We develop systems to enable these technologies so that Kenyans have options. I must not build brick and mortar.
Yes.
If I want a container house, I can build it, and the process will be easy. Yeah. So I think it just boils down to the same conversation we had earlier about professionals getting to go into class.
Yes.
I think also the government should go into class, and we need, because you'll shatter a lot of dreams.
Yeah, plus container homes is already picking speed, and whatever in terms of inquiry and build, whatever we're building now is not what we used to build when I got into the space in 2017. So it's a movement that I don't think they'll be able to stop. And the best way to go about it is just understand it and just know how to go about it. And if maybe you can identify professionals who've mastered this art, then bring them on board and just have a conversation with them, so that if it's a matter of revenue that you feel you're missing out on, know how to go about it. Because you see, like permits, approvals, they're done on permanent structures on that space. Containers are still considered as temporary structure. So if you tell me you need approvals for a temporary structure, I think in that case, what you need is a permit, not an approval, right? Because under approval, you need quite a number of things that do not apply kwa hii container. But with a permit, for whatever purpose they have, as long as it's not a commercial space, because if it's a commercial space, that's outrightly you need approvals for. But if it's a house, someone has just placed 1 or 2 or even 3 containers on site, what will the approvals be looking at?
Right. So in short, our engineer and builder here, we are saying, don't be rigid. Don't be rigid. As we finalize, kuna hii swali nyeti ya costs.
Yes.
You live in a container house yourself. A 2 ukona stairs.
2-story,
Yes, 2-story.
Yes.
What is the cost? What was the cost at the time you were building yours?
I did a video on that and it was very controversial. So my container home, I tried to build it as a typical Kenyan. So costs was at the top of my head. So I really went through a number of shortcuts in building my container home, because there is a certain gap that people have said this should be for it to make sense. And I really tried to fit within that gap, right? So there are a number of things I did not do. I did not insulate my lower container. I did not prime my frameworks. I just did the final painting on the outside. I was not too keen on creating openings. So there's something that is coming up as a result of that. What else? I did not do my cabinetry in full. So some things I ended up DIYing, right?
Sure.
So,
which you do very well.
I've had to learn. I've had to learn.
No wonder the name you are
DIY master.
Yes,
I'm telling you.
I think kuna mahali nilifuta mafundi kazi nikamalizia zingine. So
Superwoman.
So when it comes to cost, at the time I was building my house, I also wanted it to make a lot of sense at that time, comparing it to how much I was paying in terms of rent. So my working budget at the time was 1.5. With me trying to cut as much cost as possible, I don't think I even got to 1 million shillings, maybe 1.2.
How many bedrooms?
It's a 1-bedroom, but 2-story.
1 bedroom, 2-story. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And which year is this?
Before Corona, 2020, I think. 2020, yeah.
And now if I wanted to build the same one?
If you're to build the same, I am not giving you the same results because whatever result I have, I cannot recommend.
Yes.
So for the results I will recommend, you'd be looking at 2.5 million.
Okay.
If you're to achieve the same layout.
All right. Which is 2 stories.
Two-story, a 1-bedroom with a deck chini, deck juu, a staircase, both containers zimefunguliwa, container doors. So instead of the normal 20 times 8, 160. The normal 160 square foot, it's a little bit more because nimeongeza container doors, both chini na juu.
What do you mean by container doors?
How we do construction. Containers inakuja na container doors.
Yes.
So we maximize on its structure. So we open container doors, weld them fixed. So we introduce a wall, we introduce a floor, and we introduce a roofing. So the total length, instead of the 20, it now becomes 24 feet.
Okay.
So it's like adding more space. And it's still structurally sound, and it can still fit within a trailer or a truck, because that is also some of the considerations you have to think of and move, right? So yes, mine has those extensions. In terms of finishes, instead of doing tiling all through, which tends to make the container expensive, I now recommend SPC in some of the spaces and tile works on only heavily wet areas. In terms of cabinetry, normal cabinetry, maybe gloss cabinetry, gloss faces. So in terms of finishes, if I'm to recommend a proper finish, standard level, 2.5.
So 2.5 is?
For my 1-bedroom,
Yes.
2 levels. But you can still
with
get...
the finishes?
With the finishes.
Okay.
But you can still get a 1-bedroom in 1 40-foot container
Yes.
at 1.5.
Okay.
2 last questions. One, once you've leased a place, you have your container home, you want to move. What's the process like? Do I come back to you, or can I just do it myself? And number 2, do container homes require renovation? If yes, after how long? And what kind of renovations?
Okay, so the first one would be if you are to move your container home. The mobility of your container house is heavily dependent on how it was built. Was the contractor keen on the fact that this house will move eventually? So there's a way you can build that you completely join your containers, that moving becomes impossible. And if you choose to move, you now start deconstruction, right? Beating the sense of it being a mobile house, right? But there is a way you can build your container homes. You'll not even need your contractor there. Though I recommend having the same contractor who built your house on site, because they know where they joined, where they did not join, where they can cut, where they cannot cut, to move. My house is designed in a way I can move from where it is to a different location without too much hassle.
Okay.
Oh, the second
The second question was about renovations.
Renovation. Renovation is heavily dependent on how you built your container home. But in terms of the exterior, you'll have to think of repainting it. Maybe because of the UVs, fading of the paint, depending on the choice of paint you'll go with, you might need to repaint after every 2 years, at least for the first 3 times. Then after that, I think the paint will be thick enough, not needing a lot of repainting. In terms of the interior, 100% on the user and the choice of material.
Okay. Hari?
Yes.
Umefurahi? Mimi
Nimefurahi kabisa.
Mimi kama comrade.
Lakini hapo structural engineers tumepigwa stress.
Poleni sana.
Tukubali tu.
Nimalizie nikiomba msamaha.
It is well. Well, there you have it, guys. Mmesikia all about container houses with our lovely guest, Miss Grace. Please tell us where we can contact you for her services, please.
I have 2 platforms that I think very interesting. The first one would be YouTube, Living Tiny with Grace, where I showcase different buildings, not necessarily what I have built, also what others have built.
Hapo kwenye YouTube, I'm sorry to cut you short,
It's
but
okay.
there is one video, iko na 1.5 million
That's
views.
my own
I'm
house.
telling you. She knows what she's saying.
That's
Yes.
my own house. I also run a TikTok account under the same name, Living Tiny with Grace, but I think you can easily find it as Gracie.
Yes.
And on those two platforms, I try to showcase what has been done. And especially on TikTok, I try to talk about short issues regarding container homes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've not talked about Airbnbs. We will invite you back to talk about Airbnbs. Well, there you have it, guys. We shall see you in the next video.